Hello, everyone, and welcome to this lecture 3, the first one doing remotely, asynchronously. I hope everything is fine. And of course, if you do have questions along your assignment, along the review of this lecture, make sure to contact me in Teams. Okay, I've just opened Teams. It's a free app you can use on your phone, on the computer. You can access it from the CAT courses. And it would be better and easier than emails, in particular, since now we are moving asynchronously. I can help you better if we're using Teams. Of course, if you're using emails, fine too, but I'm a bit behind regarding emails, so I would advise you to use Teams. For today, we will have this first part of the recording to talk about the emergence of life, where life is coming from. You've been doing some lecture preparation about it, 2 lecture preps, in fact, the first and second one about it, so I can go a little bit faster. We won't be going into biology. In fact, to be honest, we will just make an overview of how life has evolved and changed over the time. We will look at the structure potentially in another video, and the organization of life on the planet, talking about biodiversity, population, and species. And then another and last video will be on mass extinction. So you have the different learning outcomes, which is you should be able to kind of explain how life has evolved over time, kind of having an idea of how biodiversity is organized between population, the change in population, how species are organized together, having an idea of especially how they're organized within the ecosystem, and then understanding that mass extinction is something natural that we have defined. We have some kind of specific numbers to define a background, what we call background extinction from a mass extinction, and that we are in fact using to see our impact from human activity right now on biodiversity. And we will conclude on the fact that in fact that we are at the beginning of a new mass extinction, the number 6, in fact. Before we do start, I have, however, the dad joke of the day. So, what comes after extinction? This should be an easy one, because after extinction comes Y extinction. Yeah, I know. You might say, okay, it's stink. Okay, just to keep inside of the same words. But I have another question. Then what comes after Y extinction? Ta-da! The end. All right, with this bad joke now I'm totally ashamed of, let's look at the structure. As I mentioned before, in this first part, in this first video, we will focus on the evolution of life, how life has evolved over time. And then in the next video, we'll be looking at the organization, biodiversity, and after that, on the biological extinction. So let's just for now do the focus of this video on the evolution of life. And for that, you've been already watching the lecture prep. If you haven't done it, make sure to do it before watching this video, because I'm kind of going, assuming that you have learned from the lecture prep, and I'm not gonna go into any of the biological parts, explaining the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, cyanobacteria and the photosynthesis. All of this has been developed and explained within those lecture preps. So I will assume that now you're able to answer questions such as, what's life? What are the characteristics of life, and how we make it, different from non-living matter? How life, has modified, in particular, the Earth's atmosphere. It, in fact, has modified the ocean, the soil, but in particular, the Earth's atmosphere. What has happened at this point? What, in fact, is maintaining the current atmospheric composition? Part of life. And so those are questions you should be able to answer quickly. Life is in fact made of some characteristic different from inorganic matter, or I should say non-living matter, in which the first one is in fact it's evolving through time because of the principle of emergence. The fact that over time, between the succession of organisms, we have noticed the appearance of new traits, of new properties. And through time, those properties will be kept or will be removed, but that's kind of helping life to evolve, to grow differently. We are not able to predict. Biologists have made a huge progress into understanding how life works, but there is no way we can really understand or predict those changes. They tend to be random. and also we cannot estimate a time. There is after the aspect of resilience, which is as soon as something happens in the environment, life is able to adapt. So there are different ways to establish what's alive from what's non-living. And in fact, kind of this little figure gives you a list of the difference between, how to make it if something is alive or not. So we have, for example, able to grow, able to reproduce. It's complex, made up of several cells, or at least one. If we talk about about prokaryotes, where they only have one cell. Eukaryotes are made of several cells, able to respond to a stimuli, meaning that if you interact with them, they will respond. They tend to be having a structure, being complex. They have a metabolism, including digestion, breathing, some type of motion. They maintain an homeostasis, so meaning that they have a separate, usually pressure system within inside of the cell than from the outside. And what we also notice is an evolution across generation. And this evolution happened with the idea of resilience, a change in the environment, not always, but that will push for an adaptation. And as we talked about for sustainability, resilience is really this idea that we will absorb, we will maybe be modified by this disturbance, by this change in the environment, but we will be able to survive it, to go over it, to adapt to it. So what I like, life as a very different definition if you're speaking as a chemist, as a physicist, as a physicist, or as a biologist, as an environmental scientist. They all have different definition, but I like this one where it's a mix of everything. Life is a self-sustaining chemical system, because in fact cells are making chemical reaction with their cells and outside of cells, in between intra and inter. I like the word that there is sustaining. Sustainability comes from there. Life is sustainable, and that those systems are capable of Darwinian evolution, in fact, an evolution that has been described by Darwin a couple of centuries ago. So the evolution is something that, again, is totally random, okay? We have a pretty good illustration of that evolution for a character that you may know from Ice Age. And the evolution is really the idea of processes that have happened through time that has changed the organism over time by changing, in fact, their genetic. And those changes have been sometimes erased, sometimes accepted through, in fact, natural selection. How good the organism was able to adapt was depending on that. So natural selection is really random and will only in some way select those organisms that fit with the environment. And so through natural selection, we're able to observe the evolution of life. Another more maybe popular figure of evolution is in fact the Homo sapien, just that you can see. Not with that, just mentioning that evolution doesn't mean that your species is getting more smarter, it's getting better. It doesn't have to be. It's just, it's a better fit to the environment than the previous one. That's it. But it doesn't have to be. We had for a time the idea that evolution was to make things better. It doesn't have to be. Okay. With that, I wanted to give you an overview of the timeline. On the video that you've been watching, you saw that life has evolved over the last 4.4 and something million years ago. In fact, it appeared 3.8 billion years ago, more or less. It's an estimation. And you'll see with this video how, in fact, the life as we know is very short regarding the life of the planet. So let's look quickly at this video. Let me just check one thing I forgot to click. Perfect. Let's look at this.
Ever thought, what if Earth only existed for 24 hours? In the first 10 minutes itself, the Earth collides with planet Theia, resulting in the creation of Moon, without which our days would have been only 6 hours long. Life originated at 4 a.m. with unicellular organisms, the true ancestors. Teaspoonful of soil contains more organisms than all humans. The single-celled organisms have moved to multicellular organisms, and life begins to prosper on Earth as we see the first instances of sexual reproduction. Seaweed has started growing, and oxygen is now spread across the Earth's atmosphere. Marine animals, who take up 99% of the planet's population, only came into existence in the last 3 hours. It is only now that we see land plants growing. Yes, the marine life came even before the plants on Earth. Think about this the next time you order yourself a seafood platter. It is not until 10:56 p.m. that dinosaurs appeared. Wait, we're still at just dinosaurs? But as our history books tell us, the dinosaurs went extinct, but the mammals survived. It is already 11:39 p.m. and no humans? The day is almost over. You must be wondering, when do we arrive? It took almost 4.6 billion years of evolution for us to exist, and we have changed so much in so little time. The Homo sapiens of today have only had a culture for less than 50,000 years.
Okay,
Do you think there's still time?
With that, you may have a better idea of how kind of young we are. Only the last 300,000 years, more or less, we've done it. I mean, we're there as Homo sapiens, and we have much, as the video said, we've made so much change, in particular since the last 200 years. So we've been there for a very short amount of time for a planet that has been going through for a lot. So we will have that kind of conclusion at the end of the lecture in the third or fourth video. It will depend on how many videos I'm making from that lecture. Quickly, to end that one, life has evolved, and in fact, the interaction of life has evolved. Evolution of life happened through the change in organism that, in fact, are different, a group of the same organism will create a population. And in fact, population that we found everywhere on the planet will be part of what we call the species, like the human species, where all the humans sharing the same characteristic will be part of. And then when you're mixing population together, species together, so again, a population is only a part of a species. But if you're mixing different species together, as we can see on this figure right here, where we have ostrich, zebra, etc., well, we are talking about an ecosystem. And in fact, we're adding within those different populations also the non-living part, which can be the soil, which can be the air, the water. And of course, we're adding also some living parts such as the plants. And so the ecosystem will be taking the biotic and abiotic one, so living and non-living. And I forgot to mention before that just below it, just before an ecosystem, we're talking about community. If we are only focusing on the living part, the different population, the different species living together without thinking about the non-living part, we're talking then about a community. Community is in fact groups of different species living together. An ecosystem would be groups of different species living together within the environment, within the ground, within the soil, within water. So we're taking what we call biotic, the living part, and non-biotic or abiotic part, which is a non-living one. Okay? And finally, we are talking, when we talk about life in general, and especially through the evolution, the diversity of life, we talk about biodiversity, the different variety of life that we have on the planet, from plants, from animals in itself. And it's estimated that about 10 to 14 million species are living on the planet. So it's a big number. And interestingly, we have known up to about 2 million species at this point. So the crazy thing to end up this video is in fact to realize that we know about a fifth of all the different species living on this planet. We are very unaware of the major part of the species living on this planet. We know most of the big ones, but some of them are hidden and we don't know about them. So when we know that we impact on our planet, in fact, we don't have a true idea of how far we impact because we're missing, in fact, some of those biodiversity that we don't know about. All right, with that, I'm stopping the video on this slide, and I'm inviting you to join for the part number 2, in where we are going to talk about how life is structured, how the population, the species interact together, and the complexity of that organization. So see you in the next video.